Z long-term randomized control studies on any diet. There's none that have ever been done. There's probably none that will ever be done. You'd have to lock up, 500 twins in a metabolic ward for the rest of their life and control every factor. So we can never know this information. But there's people out there saying, well, there's not long-term data, and yet there's no diet that has that data. Often they're short-term because it costs a lot of money. Nobody wants to pay for that. The endpoints are typically biomarkers, and biomarkers drive me crazy because, Dave Feldman, where are you at? We learn from Dave, cholesterol, it changes every day potentially. You can change it, 100 points in a week. You guys know this vitamin D. We talk about vitamin D deficiency and all that stuff. How much does vitamin D vary throughout the day? 30%. Your vitamin D level can change 30% during the daytime. If we talk about the microbiome. We get all these stool samples, we send it off for a microbiome. Well, guess what? We did recent studies, and the microbiome that you get from a stool sample doesn't even match what's in your colon half the time. When they do biopsies, they don't even line up. So we have all these biomarkers where we try to figure out what's going on, and we don't even know what they mean. Let's talk about uric acid, right? Uric acid is associated with gout. Uric acid is high, it's a bad thing. Well, guess what? If your uric acid is really high, your likelihood of getting multiple sclerosis is almost nothing. So we have these biomarkers that go up, they go down. We don't even really know what's going on there. So we what happens is we learn about a new biomarker, we get an epidemiologic study. Guess what? Everybody that had high homocysteine levels had a higher risk for cardiac disease, and therefore we now want to do everything we can to possibly lower homocysteine. We don't know if that's actually true or not. We just assume it is. And then we find out later that maybe that's not the truth. It's very difficult to blind participants for a nutritional study, right? I don't care how good the Impossible Burger tastes. You're not fooling me. I'm going to know I'm not eating real meat. So there's some real problems with this stuff. Anecdotes. This is a website, meatheals.com, that myself and Michael Goldstein, he's out here somewhere, started. This is one of our anecdotes. And let me just ask you guys a question. For you guys that have started a carnivore diet, how many of you guys decided to do that diet based on some sort of story or anecdote? How many of you guys that did that? So most of us, right? How many of you guys read through the literature and came to the conclusion that I'm going to do a carnivore diet? One person, two people out there. But realistically, this is what kind of moves the needle for so many people, and so I think it's very powerful. That's one of the reasons I wanted to start this stuff up, because I think, changing the narrative requires a powerful tool, and this works pretty well. And then there, of course, the N equals 1. We're all here about we're all our own N equals 1, and we always hear over and over again how N equals 1 doesn't really matter. And maybe there's some validity to that. There's a lot of evidence for or against meat, but there's a lot of it out there that's basically against meat. All the headlines say that. And one of the reasons for that is, again, we talked about there's no long-term randomized control trials with meaningful endpoints. We're talking about eating a lot of meat, and maybe your LDL cholesterol rises. Perhaps maybe your TMAO level goes up. This kind of nonsense that we talk about, that we hear about all the time. This is the other thing. When we look at meat eaters in epidemiology, they're not even studied. There are no meat eaters. There's people that eat a few ounces of meat, and the rest of it's plant food. So we don't really have any good endpoints on that. Probably the only modern population out there that we know about is probably Hong Kong, where they eat a pound of meat a day, which is nothing compared to what we eat, and they live longer than anyone else on the planet, and they have the highest IQ, incidentally, which is kind of interesting. And again, the short-term studies with just the biomarkers. This is the other thing. We often look at these in vitro animal studies, and they look at isolated compounds with unrealistic dosages. And I would point to you things like the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and the heterocyclic amines. If we char our meat, we're going to get cancer. But again, those studies were done massive doses. It's stuff most of us would never do. We probably have to eat completely black steaks that are not going to taste good anyway for that stuff to be, relevant. And again, that's not in a functioning human with a functioning liver. We talk about all these plant compounds and how they have these hormetic effects because they induce enzymes that will now make us tougher and stronger. But when we make that same argument, what about these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons? Does that do the same thing? It actually do the same systems often. And then